This one stayed with me for an odd reason. Not the moment most people would probably remember, but something quieter, further back than that.
Diane clicked the cap back onto her dry erase marker and stepped away from the whiteboard. 14 modules. 4 years. Every box connected to every other box by a logic so clean it almost looked like math. She tilted her head and found the one line that wasn't quite right. The feedback loop between Module 7 and Module 9, and drew a small arrow to correct it. Then she took a photo with her phone, sent it to herself, and turned off the light. The office was empty at 9:15 on a Thursday. It usually was. The cleaning crew had already come and gone, and the only sound in the suite was the hum of the HVAC system and the distant elevator chime from down the hall. Diane didn't mind. She had spent more Thursday nights in this building than she had at home during dinner, and she had made peace with that fact somewhere around year 2. When she decided that what she was building was worth the cost. The methodology was called Fieldstone. She had named it herself, on a Sunday morning at her kitchen table. Because Fieldstone was what you got when you took ordinary raw material and arranged it with enough patience and precision that it held weight. That was exactly what she was trying to do with corporate training. Take the ordinary stuff of professional development and arrange it so that it actually changed behavior instead of just filling a day on someone's calendar. Most corporate training was wallpaper. Fieldstone was load-bearing. She had figured that out by failing first. In the beginning, she had tried adapting existing frameworks, borrowing from other consultants, reverse engineering programs she admired. None of it held together the way she wanted. So she scrapped it and started from scratch, which meant 18 months of nights and weekends and a legal pad that she filled and replaced so many times she lost count of how many she'd gone through. She interviewed behavioral psychologists. She cold-called HR directors at companies she'd never worked with and asked them, bluntly, what had actually changed their teams. She ran pilot sessions for free just to get the data. She kept a folder on her laptop called What Didn't Work, and it was twice the size of the one called What Did. That was the part nobody saw. They saw the finished modules, the clean slide decks, the facilitator guides with their color-coded annotations. They didn't see the Saturday she spent driving 3 hours round trip to observe a competitor's session. Sitting in the back of a hotel conference room pretending to be a plant manager from Cincinnati. They didn't see the weeks she'd gone without a paycheck because she put every dollar they had back into development instead. Winston had seen it. He'd been there for all of it, and he had never once told her to slow down. He came through the door of the office at 9:20, carrying 2 coffees from the place on the corner that stayed open until 10. He set one on her desk without asking because he already knew she wanted it. He was still in his work clothes, charcoal trousers, a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he looked the way he always looked at the end of a long day, which was tired in a way that somehow made him seem more solid rather than less. "Whiteboard again," he said, glancing at the marker in her hand. "I fixed the 7 to 9 loop. You've fixed it 4 times. This time it's actually fixed." He smiled and picked up his coffee and leaned against the edge of the desk and looked at the board. He studied it the way he studied most things she showed him, seriously, without pretending to understand the parts he didn't. Winston had never claimed to be the curriculum person. He said that plainly and without embarrassment from the very beginning. What he was the person who could walk into a room with a CFO and walk out with a signed contract. He could read a client relationship the way Diane read a module structure, instinctively, architecturally, knowing where the weak joints were before anyone said a word about them. They had built the firm on that division. She built the product. He built the pipeline. It had taken time, and it had taken sacrifice that neither of them had fully anticipated when they started. But by the end of year 3, they had 7 active enterprise clients and a waitlist. By year 4, Fieldstone had a reputation in their market that Diane could not have manufactured with a marketing budget twice the size of the one they didn't have. It had arrived the old way, through results, through referrals, through clients who sent their colleagues because something in their organization had actually shifted. Martinson called, Winston said, still looking at the board. And? They want a second cohort, same format, same facilitators. Diane wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. When? Q1. He said the leadership team won't stop talking about the feedback session from Module 11. She nodded slowly. Module 11 was the one she'd rewritten 3 times because the original version created insight, but not accountability. The version that worked had a specific structure she'd arrived at almost by accident, and she had then reverse-engineered why it worked so she could replicate it deliberately. That was the whole game, the accidental insight followed by the relentless process of making it replicable. "Tell him yes," she said. "Already did." He finally looked at her instead of the board. "You should eat something." "I ate. When?" She thought about it. Lunch. He put his coffee down, pulled his phone out, and ordered Thai from the place 2 blocks away that delivered until midnight. He did it without making a production of it, just tapped through the order and put the phone back in his pocket, and Diane looked at him for a moment in the way you look at something you've stopped noticing because it has always been there. He caught her looking. "What?" "Nothing," she said. "The loop is fixed." He picked up his coffee again. "You said that last time." She turned back to the board. The room settled into a familiar quiet. The whiteboard, the marker, the 2 coffees going slowly cold, the city pressing dark against the windows. It was an ordinary Thursday night, the kind they had accumulated quietly, one after another, until they had built something real. Neither of them said so out loud. There was no reason to. It was simply the life they had made. And it was there. And it was steady. And Diane turned the marker over in her hands and got back to work. The Thai food arrived at 11:47. Winston set the bags on the work table and started pulling out containers while Diane saved the updated module diagram to 3 separate locations: laptop, external drive, cloud backup. Old habit. She'd lost 6 weeks of work to a hard drive failure in year 2 and had never fully recovered the trust she once had in any single system. They ate standing up, the way they usually did when they worked late. Diane took the pad thai. Winston went for the green curry. The office smelled like lemongrass and dry erase marker, and the city outside had gone quiet enough that she could hear the elevator down the hall. Winston's phone lit up on the table between them. He picked it up before she could see the screen. Not fast, not the grab of someone caught, just a smooth, practiced reach. The kind of motion that didn't announce itself. He glanced at it, set it face down, and pulled apart a set of chopsticks. "Martinson again?" Diane asked. "No." He broke up a clump of rice. "Spam." She nodded and went back to her pad thai. The explanation was plausible. Winston's number had ended up on 3 different marketing lists after they'd registered the firm, and his phone pulled in junk at all hours. She'd watched him delete it a dozen times. She didn't think about it again. They talked through the Q1 expansion for another 40 minutes. Diane pulled up her notes on Module 12 and walked Winston through a sequencing change she'd been considering. Moving the accountability framework earlier so it could anchor the back half of the cohort rather than arriving too late to do real work. Winston listened with his elbows on the table, nodding in the right places. He asked 2 questions. Both were good ones. At 12:30, he started packing up the food containers. "You driving or subway?" he asked. Subway. She was already logging out of the shared drive. Winston pulled on his jacket. He checked his phone again, this time openly, the way you'd check the time, and dropped it in his pocket. "Martinson wants to loop in their new HR lead for the onboarding call," he said. "I told him that was up to you." Diane looked up. What happened to Claire? Winston zipped his bag. Moved to a different account, I think. Internal shuffle. When did that happen? Few weeks ago. He shrugged with one shoulder. Martinson mentioned it in passing. I didn't think it was a big deal. It wasn't. Account contacts shifted all the time, and Claire Bowen had never been particularly engaged with the curriculum itself. Competent, professional, present on calls, but she'd always let her team carry the implementation detail. Losing her as a contact was mildly inconvenient and nothing more. Diane turned off the lights in the back room and grabbed her coat. I'll need a name for the new lead before the onboarding call. Don't let Martinson skip that. Already asked, Winston said. He's sending it tomorrow. They walked out together, took the elevator down, and split at the corner. Diane headed for the subway entrance. Winston turned the other direction toward the garage. She watched him for a second out of habit. He walked with that same solid, unhurried stride he always had, and then went down the stairs. On the train, she opened her notes app and typed 2 lines about the Module 12 sequencing change before the tunnel killed her signal. She stared at the black screen for a moment, then put her phone away. What she didn't know was that Claire Bowen hadn't moved to a different account. Claire Bowen was still the primary HR contact at Martinson. She had been for 2 years. Her name was still at the top of every contact sheet in the shared drive, in a folder Diane had built and maintained herself. A folder she had no reason to open at 12:40 on a Thursday night. Riding a near-empty train home with pad thai sitting warm in her stomach and a curriculum problem she thought she'd just solved. Winston's phone had lit up at 11:47. The timestamp on Claire Bowen's last message to him read 11:46. The email came at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon. Diane was at her desk reviewing the Module 12 sequencing notes she'd typed on the subway. A cold cup of coffee at her elbow, the whiteboard behind her still showing the corrected feedback arc between 7 and 9. Her inbox refreshed. The sender line read, Patricia Howe, VP Operations Doran Caffrey Group. Subject line, Q2 Intake, FWD, Weekend Logistics. Doran Caffrey was a mid-size client, 2 cohorts completed, a third in discussion. Patricia Howe was methodical and polite, and had never sent Diane anything that wasn't directly operational. Diane opened it. The forward chain was 3 messages deep. Patricia had clearly meant to strip it before sending. The original message she'd intended to pass along was a single paragraph about Q2 scheduling. But she hadn't stripped it. Beneath her message, the thread continued downward. Diane scrolled. The second message was from Winston. Sent Friday at 6:53 p.m. from his personal email address, not his Fieldstone account. The subject line had been this weekend before Patricia's assistant had looped it into a scheduling thread by mistake and the subject had auto-corrected. Already booked Saugatuck. Same place. Check-in is 3, I'll get there first and sort the room. Bring the good coffee because the stuff they have there is genuinely terrible. Can't wait to see you. Diane's hand stopped moving. She read it twice. Then she scrolled down. The third message was the original. Sent Thursday at 11:46 p.m. The sender name loaded, and Diane looked at it for a moment before it fully registered. Claire Bowen. The timestamp was 11:46 p.m. She had been sitting 4 feet from Winston at 11:47 when his phone lit up. She had watched him pick it up smoothly and set it face down and pull apart his chopsticks. Spam, he had said. Claire's message read, counting down. I keep thinking about the drive up last time, talking the whole way. Windows down. Book somewhere with a fireplace if you can. I want that again. Diane set her phone face down on the desk. Then, she picked it up again. She read both messages a third time, then a fourth, the way she read anything she needed to be absolutely certain about. The way she'd read behavioral research and module drafts and contracts. She was looking for a seam, a reading that bent the other way. There was none. Same place. Can't wait to see you. That was not a business trip. I keep thinking about the drive up last time. That was not a scheduling conflict. This was two people who had been doing this long enough to have a last time and a favorite place and a shorthand that assumed privacy. She put the phone down. The office was quiet. The whiteboard stood behind her. 14 modules, 4 years of architecture. Martinson was on the waitlist for Q1. Claire Bowen was Martinson's primary HR contact and had been for 2 years. Diane had emailed Claire directly 17 times. She had been on calls with her. She had sent her the pre-cohort assessment tool and waited for Claire's notes, which were always thorough and on time. She moved to a different account, Winston had said. Internal shuffle. Diane opened her browser. She pulled up the Martinson Company directory, which was publicly accessible because Martinson was a firm that positioned itself on transparency. She searched Claire Bowen. Claire Bowen, Director of Human Resources, Enterprise Partnerships. Listed as primary contact for 2 named accounts. Martinson was one of them. She had not moved. There had been no shuffle. Diane closed the browser. She sat with her hands flat on the desk and looked at the whiteboard. Module 7. The feedback loop. 9 weeks of reworking before it held. She had the external drive in her bag and the cloud backup running and the what didn't work folder with twice as many files as the one that worked. Because she had learned a long time ago to document every failure carefully so she could not deceive herself about what had gone wrong. She thought about Saugatuck, a fireplace. I want that again. She thought about a drive with the windows down, 2 people talking the whole way, comfortable enough to want the same thing twice. That was not something that started last month. That was a settled intimacy, the kind that had a rhythm, a history, a set of preferences, a favorite room, good coffee they brought themselves because the local kind wasn't worth it. She thought about Winston rolling up his sleeves at 9:20 and setting 2 coffees on the table and asking 2 good questions about Module 12 sequencing. She thought about the elevator, the corner where they'd split, subway or driving. His hand lifted in a brief wave as he turned toward the garage. She thought about Claire Bowen's thorough, on-time notes. Every pre-cohort assessment returned clean, annotated, professional. Diane forwarded Patricia Howe's original scheduling email to her own personal address, stripping the chain below it first so only Patricia's paragraph remained. Then she opened her contacts and found the number for her attorney, Martin Selby, retained 2 years ago for the Fieldstone Partnership Agreement. And she looked at it for a long moment without dialing. She put the phone in her bag. She picked up her coffee, found it cold, set it back down. The whiteboard hadn't changed. 14 modules. The feedback arc between 7 and 9 corrected and holding. Q1 onboarding for Martinson already confirmed, and Winston had told her Martinson would send the new HR lead's name tomorrow. She already knew he wouldn't. Diane pulled her laptop toward her and opened a new document. She typed the date at the top. Then she began to write, the same way she had always begun anything that mattered, from the beginning, in order, leaving nothing out. Diane finished the document at 4:40 that afternoon, 11 pages, every line time-stamped, and she did not send it to anyone yet. She closed the laptop. She sat in the office she and Winston had built out of nothing, the whiteboard glowing under the track lights, 14 modules in her handwriting, and she made the only choice that was hers to make. She would not confront him. She would not give him the satisfaction of a scene he could later describe to Claire as Diane falling apart. She would take the thing they had built and walk out of it carrying the only part that mattered. She called Martin Selby's office at 4:52 and asked for the partnership agreement, the one from 2 years ago, the one Winston had skimmed and signed because he trusted her to handle the boring parts. Martin read her the relevant clause over the phone while she stood at the window. The intellectual property, the methodology, the 14 modules, the client materials, the assessment frameworks, was registered in her name, not the firm's. Hers, Winston had ownership of the entity, the bank account, the office lease. Diane owned Fieldstone itself. At the time, she'd done it because the work was hers, and she was protective of it the way she was protective of everything she made with her own hands. She had not done it as a weapon. She had done it because she loved the thing. "You understand what this means," Martin said. "I understand exactly what it means," Diane said, and hung up. She drove home and Winston was already there, on the couch, his sock feet on the coffee table, the same green curry smell in the kitchen from his lunch. He looked up and smiled at her, the easy smile, and asked how Doran Caffrey was looking for Q2. She said the scheduling was fine. She made tea. She did not look at him longer than she could stand. He scrolled his phone with his thumb, and she watched his thumb move and thought about the message from Claire that had come in at 11:46 on a Thursday, while he stood 2 feet from her eating pad thai and called the woman's name spam. The next 3 days, she moved the pieces. She did it in the small hours, in the office before he came in the car with the engine off. She exported the client database, Martinson, Doran Caffrey, the 7 active accounts, the waitlist, to her personal drive, the same way she backed everything up after losing 6 weeks of work in year 2. She duplicated the module library. She drafted a new entity, Fieldstone Methodology LLC, her name on the formation documents, and she did it from her phone at a red light, because she could not stand to do it at the desk where she'd built the real thing. It cost her more than she expected. She'd thought the anger would carry her, clean and hot. Instead, she kept finding herself stopped. She found herself standing in the office at 6 in the morning looking at Module 11, the one she'd rewritten 3 times to make accountability land instead of just insight, and she remembered Winston bringing her coffee the night she cracked it, saying you got it, you finally got it, and meaning it. He had meant it. That was the part that wouldn't sit flat. He had meant the good things, too. He had loved the work and lied about the woman, and there was no clean line between the 2 men. Just one man who had done both. She filed the formation documents Thursday morning. 1 week to the day since Claire's counting down. Winston knew something was wrong before he knew anything at all. It started small. She'd stopped asking him questions across the office. For 4 years, she'd asked him things constantly. What did Martinson think of the sequencing? Did Patricia get back to you? Can we move the onboarding call? And now, she didn't. He noticed the quiet the way you notice a clock that's stopped, not all at once, but the wrongness of it accumulating until you look up. "You've been heads down," he said Wednesday afternoon. "Everything okay?" She didn't look up from the screen. He stood there a second too long. "Diane, I'm fine. Deadline brain." He went back to his desk. She heard him pick up his phone, set it down, pick it up again. She heard him not type anything. The silence stretched, and he filled it by clearing his throat twice. And she understood that some animal part of him had caught the scent of the thing and didn't yet have a name for it. That night he tried to be warm. He suggested dinner out. He used the voice he used on clients who were wavering, the one that found the soft thing in a person and pressed on it gently. "We haven't done a real dinner in weeks," he said. "Let me take you somewhere." She said she was tired. She watched him absorb that and recalibrate, and she thought, "You are managing me. You have been managing me for 2 years, and I let you because I was busy building the thing you're standing on." Friday morning, she sent the email. It went to all 7 active clients and the full waitlist on Fieldstone Methodology letterhead, her name, her new entity. It was 3 paragraphs, professional, warm, no drama. Effective immediately, Fieldstone's curriculum and ongoing engagements will continue under new direct management. Your point of contact remains me. Nothing about your program changes except the name on the invoice. She copied Martin. She did not copy Winston. She was at her desk when he opened it. She heard the chair scrape. She heard him say her name once, low, a question. Then she heard him read it again, because the sound he made the second time was different. Sharper, the breath going out of him. Diane, what is this? It's exactly what it says. He came around the partition holding his phone out like it had burned him. You can't. Fieldstone is the firm. This is the firm's product. You can't just... It was never the firm's product. She kept her voice level. It's registered to me. It's been registered to me for 2 years. You signed it. His face moved through 3 things fast. Confusion, then a flicker of something that wanted to be anger. Then the first cold edge of fear. That's not. Martin set that up as a formality. That doesn't mean you can take the whole, call him. Winston fought back. This was the part she'd braced for, and it came exactly when she expected, and from exactly the direction she expected. Because she knew him. He didn't yell. He got reasonable. Which was worse, because reasonable was his instrument. He sat down across from her and folded his hands and said the clients were relationships. His relationships. That he'd built every one of those accounts. That Martinson and Dorian Caffrey were loyal to him, and that a curriculum without client relationships was a binder full of paper. He said it almost kindly. He said, Diane, you build beautifully. You always have. But you have never once sat across a table and closed one of these. They'll come back to me. They know me. And for one long moment, the floor moved under her. Because he was right about one thing. He had the relationships. He had 2 years of dinners and golf and birthday texts with the people who signed the checks. She had the product and he had the people. And a product nobody renewed was just her ego in a binder. She felt the doubt arrive in her chest like cold water. What if they followed his voice instead of her name? What if all of this collapsed the second he picked up the phone and started his reasonable warm pressing on the soft thing voice with Patricia Howe and the others? He saw it land on her. She watched him see it. He almost smiled. Let me make some calls, he said gently. We'll sort this out. Claire Bowen, Diane said. He stopped. You'll want to call Claire first, I'd think. She kept her hands flat on the desk so they wouldn't shake. Since she's your relationship at Martinson. Your biggest account. The one you told me she'd left. The color went out of his face in a single drop, like someone had pulled a plug. And then she gave him the thing she'd built the floor out of. The thing she'd done not as a weapon, but because she loved the work. The same instinct that had registered the IP in her name. Every client onboarding for 2 years went through my assessment framework, she said. Every renewal conversation referenced my outcome data. The relationships you're so proud of, they renewed because Module 11 changed their people's behavior, and they could see it in their own metrics. Patricia Howe didn't sign a 3rd cohort because she likes you, Winston. She signed it because it worked. I have every outcome report. I have the data. You have a phone full of numbers and nothing to sell them. She paused. Make the calls. Please find out whose relationship it really was. His mouth opened and nothing came out. He picked up his phone anyway. He had to. He called Patricia Howe and she watched him do it. Watched him put on the warm voice. Watched it falter halfway through the first sentence. Because Patricia had already read Diane's email and Patricia was relieved. Diane could tell from the way Winston's shoulders dropped. Patricia was glad to keep working with the person who'd actually built the thing her people responded to. He said, of course, completely understand in a voice that climbed half a step and cracked on the second of course. He hung up without saying goodbye. He called Martinson. Not Claire. He couldn't call Claire, and Diane watched him not be able to. Watched his thumb hover over her name and move past it like it was electrified. He called the main line. He got the new HR lead, the one he'd told her about, the one being looped into onboarding instead of Claire, and Diane heard enough of it to know that the new lead was being looped in precisely because Claire was being quietly moved off the account. That whatever had been happening between Winston and Claire had already started to cost Claire too, internally, in ways that had nothing to do with Diane, and everything to do with a woman who'd let a vendor relationship become something it shouldn't have. The proportional thing. The secondary thing. Diane took no pleasure in it and felt it land anyway. Winston set the phone down on her desk very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped being reliable. He sat there. She didn't say anything. This was the part she'd waited for without knowing she was waiting, and she'd promised herself she would not fill it. So she let the silence do the work. And the silence was enormous, and into it Winston's whole face came apart slowly, not in tears, in something worse, in the dawning arithmetic of a man recalculating 2 years backward and finding her ahead of him at every single step. She watched him understand it. She watched him realize that the IP registration he'd waved off as a formality had been the floor under her feet the entire time. That the backups she made obsessively, the outcome reports she filed, the assessment data she logged, all the boring, careful things he'd never paid attention to because they weren't relationships, were the actual firm. That while he was at a fireplace in Saugatuck thinking he was the clever one, the woman he'd lied to had owned the thing he was lying to her over the whole time, and had owned it before either of them had ever heard of Claire Bowen. "You knew," he said. His voice was barely there. Thursday. The phone. "You knew Thursday." "I knew the following Tuesday." She let that sit. "You called her name spam, Winston, to my face. With pad thai in your hand." His eyes were wet now, and his jaw worked, and no words came. He looked around the office, at the whiteboard, at the 14 modules in her handwriting, at 4 years of his life that turned out to be hers, and she watched the size of it arrive in him all at once, too big to hold. The exact dimensions of what he'd thrown away for drives with the windows down. He picked up his phone a third time. He stared at it. There was no one left to call. Martin called on a Monday to say the separation of the entity was clean. Diane wrote the date in her notebook and closed it. She spent that afternoon in a rented office space 2 miles from where Fieldstone used to live. A single room with north-facing windows and a radiator that knocked every 20 minutes. She'd signed the lease with a personal check. The walls were bare. Her whiteboard was propped against the far wall, still wrapped in the moving paper she'd used to protect it. And she hadn't unwrapped it yet. She wasn't avoiding it. She just wasn't ready to rush. Winston had called 3 times the week before. She let all 3 go to voicemail and didn't listen to them. Martin handled what needed to be handled. She didn't need to hear Winston's voice to know what was in those messages. The pivot from anger to reason. Probably. The tone he used with difficult clients when he needed to reframe the room. She'd watched him do it enough times to know the shape of it. She heard through Patricia how, briefly and without drama, that he was approaching other firms about partnership arrangements. Patricia mentioned it the way you mention weather, not urgently, just as a fact that existed. Diane said, "I hope it works out," and meant very little by it, and they moved on to Q2 scheduling. The Martinson cohort started the following Thursday. A new HR lead named Reyes joined the onboarding call, professional and prepared, and Diane walked the room through the Fieldstone sequencing the same way she always had. Concrete, paced, nothing ornamental. Reyes asked a sharp question about the accountability framework in Module 11. Diane answered it without notes. The call ran 12 minutes over because the conversation was worth it. She didn't think about Winston during the call. That was the thing. She didn't have to decide not to think about him. He just wasn't there. On Wednesday, she bought groceries for the first time in 3 weeks. Real groceries, not the rotating cycle of convenience store coffee and takeout containers that had accumulated in a decade of late office nights. She bought things with weight to them: good bread, a block of cheese, salad greens in a paper bag. She set them on the counter of her apartment and looked at them for a moment like they were evidence of something. She ate dinner standing at her kitchen window. It had rained all afternoon, and the street below was wet and dark, and the streetlights made small reflected doubles of themselves in the puddles. She ate slowly. The bread was good. There was nothing pressing. There was nowhere she needed to be in an hour, no logistics rotating in the back of her mind, no phone she was waiting to hear light up on a table. She left the dishes in the sink and didn't apologize to herself about it. The following Monday, she unwrapped the whiteboard. She set it against the wall of the new office and stood in front of it with a marker uncapped. 14 modules. She knew every connection between them, had rebuilt them from the first interview with the first behavioral psychologist, had cataloged every failed version in a folder that was twice the size of the folder that worked. She didn't redraw the whole map. She added one note in the upper right corner, a sequencing possibility she'd been sitting with since the Reyes call. Something about compressing the lead into Module 12, tightening the frame before accountability entered the room. She capped the marker. She looked at it. She made a second note underneath the first. Outside, the radiator knocked twice and went quiet. She pulled her phone out, not to check anything in particular, just motion, habit. There were 2 emails she'd deal with in the morning and a text from Patricia that could wait. Nothing from Winston. She set the phone face up on the windowsill, which she'd been doing lately without quite deciding to. The afternoon light came through the north facing windows and lay flat and even across the floor. It was the kind of light that didn't flatter anything or dramatize anything, it just showed what was there. She uncapped the marker again and stood in front of the board, and the room was quiet, and she began.
Of everything in this case, it's not the separation I keep coming back to. It's a phone, left face up on a windowsill in a new office, for no reason she could quite explain even to herself. I don't know why that's the part that stayed, but it did. I'll leave it with you too.